before the fifth sun rose over the Valley of Mexico, before the great pyramids cast their long shadows across the earth, the world had been made and unmade 4 times. Each creation ended in catastrophe, drowned in flood, consumed by wind, swallowed by darkness. The gods gathered at Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods, and debated what must be done. The cosmos hung in a state of suspension, no light, no warmth, no direction. Into this sacred uncertainty, one figure would emerge above all others, a god of wind and morning, of wisdom and feathers and scales. His name would echo through centuries long after the temples crumbled to dust. He was born of contradiction, of sky and earth, of feather and fang. His mother was Quetzalcoatl, or in some tellings, Chimalma, a celestial woman who swallowed a jade stone and found herself carrying the impossible. His father was one of the 4 great creator gods, Mixcoatl, the cloud serpent, a deity of the hunt and the Milky Way itself. From his first breath, Quetzalcoatl embodied the union of opposites, the Quetzal bird, symbol of freedom and beauty, fused with the coatl, the serpent, symbol of earth, death, and the underworld. He was the sky made flesh, the wind given purpose, a god who from his very origins could never be only one thing. Among the Aztec pantheon, Quetzalcoatl wore many faces. As Ehecatl, he was the god of wind, invisible, irresistible, the breath that swept the path clean so that Tlaloc's rain could reach the earth. The circular temples built in his honor had no corners, for corners obstruct the wind. As the morning star, he was Tzecatl, one reed, the brilliant light of Venus rising before the sun, herald of a new day. He was patron of priests and scribes, guardian of the sacred calendar, bestower of maize and human civilization. Without Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec believed, there would be no art, no time, no sustenance. He was not merely worshipped, he was the architecture of existence itself. When the fifth sun was born at Teotihuacan and the New World required people to inhabit it, it was Quetzalcoatl who descended into the realm of the dead. Mictlan, the 9-layered underworld, was no place for the living. Its lord, Mictlantecutli, the skeletal god of death, did not release what he held. But Quetzalcoatl went nonetheless, bearing a conch-shell trumpet, tasked with retrieving the bones of the people from previous worlds. He tricked the death god. He ran. He fell. The bones shattered. And yet he gathered the broken fragments, ground them with his own blood, and from that sacred mixture, bone dust and divine sacrifice, humanity was made. We are, in his telling, the children of imperfection, made whole from shattered pieces. But bones alone could not sustain the new race. They required sustenance, and it was again Quetzalcoatl who provided it. Transformed into a black ant to move undetected, he crept into the mountain called Tonacatepetl, the mountain of sustenance, where maize had been hidden away since the previous creation, locked inside stone. He carried a single kernel back between his jaws. The other gods examined it, tasted it, and understood immediately what it was. They consulted the sun, performed the sacred rites, and split the mountain open with a thunderbolt. The maize tumbled free. From that day forward, it fed the people. Every tamale, every sacred offering of corn, every tortilla pressed between human hands, each one carried Quetzalcoatl's fingerprints. In another layer of his legend, where myth bleeds into history, Quetzalcoatl walked as a man. He was Tzecatl Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl, priest king of Tula, the great Toltec city, and the age he ruled was remembered in Aztec tradition as a paradise. The corn grew so large, men could not carry a single cob. Cotton bloomed already dyed in every color of the earth. Birds of extraordinary plumage sang in gardens of perpetual flowering. There was no hunger, no want, no war under his rule. He forbade human sacrifice, offering only flowers and butterflies to the gods. He taught writing, astronomy, metallurgy, and the sacred arts. The Aztecs, centuries later, still called the finest craftsmen Toltecs, meaning simply those who came from where Quetzalcoatl lived. No paradise endures. Into the golden age of Tula came Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, and he was everything Quetzalcoatl was not. Where the feathered serpent offered light, Tezcatlipoca offered darkness. Where one elevated humanity, the other revealed its most savage hungers. He was the god of the night sky, of sorcery, of jaguars and deceit, and his obsidian mirror reflected not your face but the hidden truth of your soul, every shameful thought, every buried desire. He hated what Quetzalcoatl had built in Tula. He resented the peace, and so Tezcatlipoca descended into the city not with armies, but with something far more insidious. He came with a mirror, and with pulque, the intoxicating sacred drink, and with a whisper, disguised as a gift. Tezcatlipoca approached Quetzalcoatl under the guise of a merchant, or, in some tellings, a physician. He told the priest-king he had brought medicine for his illness, and when the god-king examined the dark mirror offered to him, he saw himself as he truly was, or as Tezcatlipoca wished him to believe he was, wizened, ravaged, unfit to be seen by his people. Whether the reflection was true or conjured matters not. Its effect was total. Shame consumed him, and Tezcatlipoca pressed his advantage, offering pulque, 5 cups of the sacred drink that loosened the tongue, clouded the mind, and dissolved the rigid codes by which Quetzalcoatl had governed himself and his city. He drank, and everything that followed was the consequence of that single surrender. What Quetzalcoatl did in his state of intoxication varies between sources. Some say he violated his priestly vows of celibacy with his own sister. Others that he simply abandoned the sacred rites he had upheld for an age. What all versions agree upon is this. When dawn came and the pulque's haze lifted, the weight of what had occurred was unbearable. The man who had forbidden all blood sacrifice. The priest-king who had built a civilization on discipline and divine order. He had failed by his own impossible standard. And in the way of mythic heroes undone not by enemies but by their own humanity, Quetzalcoatl wept. He gathered his priests, his scribes, his most faithful followers. He burned the houses of jade and turquoise. He buried his treasures, and he began to walk toward the sea. The journey of Quetzalcoatl from Tula to the coast is one of the great mythic pilgrimages of Mesoamerican tradition. He did not travel in silence. He wept, and where his tears fell, they left marks, on rock, on stone, on the landscape itself. At one point he paused to rest beneath a great tree and looked back toward Tula, and the branches of that tree bore the imprint of his seated form forever after. He played a final game of Tlachtli, the sacred ball game of life and death, and lost. Demons and sorcerers sent by Tezcatlipoca harassed him along the route, attempting to turn him back or destroy him entirely. He passed mountains and crossed rivers. His attendants died of cold in the high passes. He arrived at the Gulf Coast as the last of an age. Tezcatlipoca was not finished. He dispatched sorcerers, dark practitioners who barred Quetzalcoatl's path and demanded answers. They asked, "Where are you going? Why have you abandoned your people?" But the sorcerers also offered gifts that were traps. They offered a garment of Quetzal feathers, of jade, and of red shell, the full regalia of divine royalty, knowing that to accept it meant to re-enter the world of obligation and desire. Quetzalcoatl accepted. He wore the sacred garments, seeing himself reflected in a river adorned in the symbols of his own divine nature. Something complex stirred. Recognition, perhaps, or pride, or simply the unbearable weight of what he once was and no longer felt himself to be. Even departing gods cannot entirely shed the memory of their own divinity. When Quetzalcoatl finally reached the coast, the place the Aztec called Tlapalan, the land of the red and black, of writing and wisdom, the sea lay before him in the darkness of the east. The Gulf of Mexico stretched to infinity. Here, accounts diverge dramatically. In some tellings, the feathered serpent built a raft of serpents woven together and sailed eastward across the water, disappearing into the horizon without looking back. In others, he climbed onto a funeral pyre of his own making, burned himself alive, and his heart rose from the flames as the planet, Venus, transformed at last into the morning star he had always been associated with. Death and departure, sacrifice and transcendence. The myth chose both endings because both were true. He left the world, and he promised to return. The version of the myth that held the deepest resonance describes the burning. Quetzalcoatl stood before his own funeral pyre on the eastern shore and made of himself the final offering. As the flames consumed him, birds of every species rose from the fire. Scarlet macaws, bluebirds, yellow birds, birds of white, and birds of rich red, the full spectrum of beauty ascending to heaven. When at last the pyre burned to ash, silence fell. And then, after 4 days in the darkness of the underworld, the same number of days required for Venus to be invisible during its cycle, a light appeared, small at first, then brilliant, rising before the sun. The morning star burned in the east with an intensity that seemed new to the world. He had not died. He had become what he had always been, light before the sun. But in the version that would haunt history most severely, Quetzalcoatl did not die. He promised to return. He had departed in the year 1 Reed, Quetzalcoatl, his own sacred birth sign on the ritual calendar, and the Aztec calendar, cycling in its vast complexity, would bring that year back again and again. The priests calculated and recorded. In the year 1 Reed, Quetzalcoatl would return from the east, from across the great water. He would be light-skinned. He would reclaim what was his. Every emperor of the Aztec world, including the great Moctezuma II, held this prophecy like a stone in the chest. Not quite fear, not quite faith, but something more consuming than either. It was, perhaps, the most consequential promise a god ever made, because the calendar does not lie, and 1 Reed always returns. The Aztec Empire that rose from the lake city of Tenochtitlan was one of the most complex and powerful civilizations the Americas ever produced. Yet throughout its dominance, Quetzalcoatl's shadow lay across it. The human sacrifices that Quetzalcoatl had once forbidden were now performed by the thousands. The gods demanded blood to keep the sun moving across the sky. Huitzilopochtli, the war god, had eclipsed the gentle priest-king in the official pantheon. And yet, Quetzalcoatl persisted. He was never abandoned. The wind still needed sweeping clean. The morning star still needed its patron. And somewhere in the texture of Aztec spiritual life, the memory of the golden age, of a time before blood and war, created an unresolvable longing. A civilization built on sacrifice, yearning quietly for the god who had refused it. In the years before 1519, Moctezuma II received his omens in clusters. A comet appeared in the daytime sky. Impossible. Terrifying. Fire erupted from the temple of Huitzilopochtli without cause. A woman's voice was heard wailing through the night across Tenochtitlan. "My children, we are lost." The lake of Texcoco churned and flooded without storm or earthquake. A bird was caught by hunters and brought to Moctezuma, a crane with a dark mirror on its head. When the emperor looked into that mirror, he saw warriors coming, armies, men on animals like vast deer. And then the bird vanished in his hands. Whether these omens were experienced or constructed in retrospect, their meaning to Moctezuma was clear. One reed was arriving. Quetzalcoatl was keeping his promise. The god was coming home. In 1519, the year one reed by the Aztec calendar, Hernán Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast of Mexico with 500 soldiers, 16 horses, and the incomprehensible technology of cannon and steel. His ships appeared on the horizon of the very sea from which Quetzalcoatl had departed. He came from the east. His skin was pale. His soldiers wore metal like second skin. Whether Moctezuma truly believed Cortés was Quetzalcoatl returned, or whether he was simply paralyzed by the collision of prophecy, military reality, and political impossibility, historians have debated for centuries. What is not debated is what Moctezuma sent to Cortés as his first gift: the full divine regalia of Quetzalcoatl, the turquoise mosaic mask, the headdress of Quetzal feathers, the sacred serpent ornaments, the garments of the god himself. Whether prophecy or politics, myth or miscalculation, the consequences were absolute. Moctezuma received Cortés within Tenochtitlan. He gave him the palace of his own father, and within days, Cortés had taken the emperor himself hostage. The city that had taken centuries to build, the empire that stretched from coast to coast and counted millions of souls, began to dissolve with terrifying speed. Smallpox moved ahead of the conquistadors like a ghost army, killing those who had never been touched by European disease. The subject peoples, whom the Aztecs had long oppressed, rose against them as allies of Cortés. In less than 2 years, Tenochtitlan fell. The temples burned. The sacred manuscripts were fed to fire. And the god who had promised to return, who had once forbidden all sacrifice, had returned only as the instrument of the empire's annihilation. They burned the books. They toppled the temples. They built cathedrals on the rubble of pyramids, deliberately, stone by stone, so that the new god might stand on the shoulders of the old. And yet, the feathered serpent endured. He could not be entirely erased because he was too deeply woven into the fabric of the land itself. Indigenous priests and scholars, working alongside Spanish friars who hoped to understand what they were converting, transcribed the myths. Sahagún's great Florentine codex preserved the stories. Diego Duran recorded the rites. What survived was partial, fractured, translated through the lens of conquest and Christianity. And yet, it breathed. The memory of the golden age, of the weeping god who refused blood, of the morning star that burns before the sun. These things required no temple to persist. They required only the telling. 5 centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlan, Quetzalcoatl remains. He moves through Mexican identity, through art and architecture, through the murals of Diego Rivera, where he presides over human civilization as its original patron. He surfaces in the carved facades of universities, in the names of streets and mountains and children. He is claimed by New Age mystics and studied by archaeologists and wept over by poets. His pyramid at Chichen Itza catches the equinox light and throws the shadow of a descending serpent down its northern staircase every spring, a display so precise it could not be accidental. The ancient architects built the return of the feathered serpent into the very stones. Every year, he descends. Every year, he leaves again. The god of wind and morning has never fully departed. He simply waits, as he always has, in the space between darkness and the rising light.